Welcome back to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristin. I'm your host, Kristin Saxena. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about how we as parents can reduce the stress you feel that comes from feeding your kids. I'm joined by our guest, Amanda Yochum, who's a dietitian at HyVee. All right. Well, welcome to the show, Amanda.
Yes, thank you so much.
So Amanda Yochum, we have hung out before. Mm-hmm. You are a dietitian at HyVee.
Yes.
And we did that fun event at HyVee. That was such a great time.
That was great. It was so fun having that audience there and cooking in front of them. It was great.
Well, I was really excited to get you back on the show. Mm-hmm. Before the show and after, we've talked a lot, and I know that we have a lot of the same thoughts and philosophies on things, but I think it's super fun to be able to talk to you about a variety of topics because you certainly come at it from a different angle as a dietitian. And obviously you're a mom as well. Mm-hmm. So in addition to kind of doing this in your professional life, you're sort of living this in your real home life, if you will. But the topic I wanted to talk to you about a little bit today was, I'm sure as a dietitian, you get this question or concern quite a bit that is, how do I get my kid to eat? Does that sound familiar?
Absolutely, yes. And I will say I get that question from a variety of parents in different situations, whether if they have a teenager or a toddler or even a 6-month-old, that question comes up. And I always commend those parents that have the young kids, that they're being proactive in trying to, get a hold of this. But that doesn't say with those teenagers that, they haven't lost hope, right? That they're still actively working to try to get their child to eat. So what I usually say is, first of all, you have to be the good role model, right? So as a parent, we need to make sure that we are having a variety of foods, that we are exposing ourselves to not only different colors, tastes, textures, smells of our food, because that kind of enlightens our brain, and usually then we're more excited to eat. But then also getting our kids involved. Having them touch it, touch the food, feel the food, all those senses again, getting them active. So that's kind of my first tip, is getting them involved.
So, because I definitely heard this a lot as well, like in a pediatric practice. People are always like, I just can't get them to eat. And you're right. It could be anywhere from a, little toddler to, people with like 18-year-olds that are like, they just don't eat what they need to eat.
Right.
And so I think like always the first thing was, well, what do you mean by that, right? Because I think sometimes it is like, I can't get them to eat. Like, I feel like they're not eating enough. Like, I know that that's certainly a concern that parents will have. Like, they just don't seem to eat what they should be, like enough. And then the other side is, it's like, well, you can't get them to eat, or you can't get them to eat what or how you want them to eat.
Right.
And I think that oftentimes, kind of piecemealing, like, well, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And I know we had talked about this before, but I think the first thing to come out is that, like, as anyone, as a parent, for sure, this process, like, there's a lot of feelings and anxiety and emotions that are tied up with feeding your kid. It seems really simple, but I think that's the first step, is to realize, like, dude, you almost everyone is carrying like, it's a loaded situation,
right,
when you're talking about that.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say too, having that more relaxed environment, first of all, we never want to bombard our kids or have them feel like we're hovering over them to eat, because what are kids going to do? They're going to do the opposite of that. So, you made a good point too, is what are they eating? Are you concerned that they're not eating enough, or are you concerned of what they're eating? So if we kind of take it at the first angle, are they eating enough? Okay, so really consider, are they snacking before meals? Are they drinking a lot of liquids before meals? That's pretty common, especially with toddlers. They get that sippy cup, and whether it be juice or milk or water, and they're thirsty.
The milk is like one that I felt like was often a problem.
Yeah, so much. And then there's so much, their tummies aren't that big. And so then they're filling up on liquids, then they're not hungry for meals. So kind of looking at that approach too. Snack time should be snack time, right? It shouldn't be the grazing all afternoon after school or after daycare. But then, presenting a meal as a meal and including those food groups, whether it be 3 different food groups or 4 different food groups. And that kind of leads into, what are they eating? So we're concerned if maybe they're not eating enough, But then the next step is, okay, what are they eating? So kind of a big tip with that is putting something that's familiar to them with something new. So if you create a brand new recipe or made a new recipe, have something that they enjoy to have along with it, whether that be, peaches, or if that's green beans, or if that's banana bread, or something that's familiar to them. Because, I mean, just like us, we don't like to be thrown into new situations, and that becomes overwhelming and anxiety and everything. So again, having that familiar food is really helpful.
Definitely. Well, and, kind of going back to like that idea where you're saying like, first I think examining the concern and saying like, okay, if your concern is, are they eating enough, or are they not getting enough of the things that I would like them to be, like not eating the way that I would like them to eat. I think probably as a dietitian as well, you guys do a lot of reviewing of, growth charts or, for kids, particular growth charts. We do like behavioral, developmentally, like lab work if we need to do, I think first things first, like I always felt like as a parent, like first recognize like, okay, this is a loaded situation. And so I'm going to have to unpack, like, why am I so worried? But I also think on the other side, it's like, but also don't ignore it. If you're having concerns, there's always that sort of like, trust your gut instinct and at least look, like at least make sure. So I like to do, the first steps are always like, first, let's just review and say like, I know it seems like your child exists on air, but they're actually, they're getting taller, they're gaining weight, they're doing all the things that are appropriate for their age. They seem to be happy and have energy and, are doing what they need to do at school and playing and active. And then beyond that, if there's specific concerns, you could think about doing lab work and say, okay, well, nothing looks abnormal. Now, does that mean that their diet is the perfect optimal? No, probably not. But, there's no emergencies here is the way I always say. There's no reason we need to like go beyond what's good in the long term to like patch something up that's sort of like emergent. And certainly if that is the case, then you need to take a more specialized approach to figure out what you need to fix. But I would say, the vast majority of the time, those concerns are often in children that are otherwise like growing and developing very normally. But it doesn't mean that it isn't a red flag that they're starting to see patterns that are like, these aren't the best patterns that I would like to see with my kid eating. So I think that's the first thing always is like, know that, okay, I might be freaking out more than I need to. And don't let that like make you think in that short term sort of way. But also to say like, but I'm going to trust my instinct and make sure, get to those checkups, go see a dietitian, see somebody that can kind of look through the data and say like, well, I don't see any, giant problems right now.
And that's exactly what I was going to say too. As a dietitian, my role is to create these healthy, lifelong eating habits. And so as you said, looking at kind of that big picture and sitting down with a dietitian, doctor, and looking at what are they eating? Because again, we're not looking for perfection. What we're looking for is consistency, and also really helping that parent understand that their portion sizes as an adult are much different than a child. And so if they're having 2 tablespoons of broccoli versus, our cup that we need, that's okay. And even I've had clients that I've worked with picky eaters. Our goal was just to have them lick the food. Licking, that is a huge milestone. And so, sometimes just celebrate those small victories. But remember, again, big picture. If maybe they didn't have a vegetable in one day, did they have a fruit? Well, they're still getting vitamin C, they're still getting fiber. And then maybe that next day we're really going to work on maybe having a vegetable that the child does prefer. And so like you said, trying to not have it be so zoned in on like one meal or one situation, but looking at that big overall. Are they growing? Are they healthy? Are they moving? Are they active? How's their blood work? If we need, again, like you said, if we need to check that, I think that is really helpful for a parent to really see they're doing okay. It's okay. Yeah.
Well, you brought up another point that I've heard before. But in terms of, I would also get a lot of parents say, a lot of kids are much better at eating fruit than they are eating vegetables, or that's like a kind of common. So, I've told people really fruits contain a lot of the same nutrients that vegetables do.
Yep.
Is that, I mean, as a dietitian, would you?
Absolutely. They both have antioxidants. I mean, of course, there's the sweetness, right? So we're trying to make sure that our kids aren't just eating sweet all day, because then the body naturally gravitates towards wanting sweet. So again, thinking about how to cook it differently. So broccoli by itself, not maybe the most favorable thing, but when you roast it.
I do love broccoli. No.
But do you like it? Do you like it raw?
I do, but not as much.
Yeah, exactly.
It's much better cooked.
Yeah, when it's baked and or sautéed, it brings out a different flavor profile, right? So again, trying to get creative and just figuring out what is that child like. And I always say with vegetables in particular, if we're talking about that, is a little dip is okay. So if they need a little ranch or a little cheese sauce, I'd rather have them eat the vegetable than not. And so having the little hummus or something with it, perfectly fine.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, so I think then that kind of like brings me, so we, you kind of be like, all right, I have my kid, I have these worries that how do I get them to eat, right? Okay, unpack that. What do you mean? First, let's make sure, like, is your kid actually growing and healthy and otherwise okay? Check. Yes.
Yep.
All right. Well, then, what I think, and we've talked about this before, is the idea is, well, then are you asking the right question? Like, is your real question, how do I get them to eat? And I know we have talked in the past about the division of responsibility and how maybe, the first step is sort of reconsidering, like, what is your responsibility or what should be your goal? And perhaps it's not getting them to eat. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that would mean to you?
Yes, our we have that same passion of that division of responsibility, and it's really, when a parent adopts that principle, it can be so helpful for them and to take that anxiety off. So that division of responsibility is the parent is responsible to have the food available, to indicate when mealtime is, but it's up to that child to determine how much they are going to eat of the food that was given. And that can be really hard, especially, we grew up in the generation of the Clean the Plate Club, right? So it can be hard. And of course, we want to gear that child into knowing that we need to eat a variety of foods, right? We can't just eat the mac and cheese. There's going to be multiple foods on there. So if that's the one bite rule, the no thank you bite, I've heard a lot of different things. That's a good way to start to get your child to eat. But also, do you have distractions going on in the house? Is the TV on? Are the phones at the table? Is there a book at the table? Really taking all those distractions away so the child and your family can really focus in on what the task is, and that is to eat. And hey, who doesn't like to eat? Most of us like to eat.
Right?
Yeah. So that's kind of that division of responsibility. Parent responsible for the food, having it available, mealtime. That child, their task is to eat.
Yeah. So, or not to.
Yes.
If they choose.
Right.
So, and I feel like,
Yes,
if I was a parent and I tune in, I'm like, oh, good. This show, how do I get my kid to eat? I want to know. And then I'm listening and I'm like, oh, don't, thanks, right? But it's true.
Right.
So I like, you check the boxes and you say, okay, this is an emergency. And then I think it's, at first, like you said, first it sounds simple, like, oh, okay. But then second, it's like in real life, it can be really hard to adhere. And so I think that, but when you realize that in the long term, this actually is what creates better eating habits. It makes the meal times more pleasant, and it doesn't become a stressful struggle between parent and child. And I remember too, I always think too, whenever somebody says this sort of like clean your plate club or something, and I don't remember the exact rules, but I always think back to school. And when I was like in elementary school, you get your tray full of food. And I remember like I had the trick, because I don't even know if it was you couldn't get up and clear your plate till you ate a certain amount. I mean, it was pretty little, but I quickly learned, well, you drink your milk first, you open up the carton, you secretly like dump the crap you don't want to eat into the carton, and you close it back up so that when they come back over, you're like, oh, right? And I mean, you learn this stuff at a young age. And so your kid's going to figure out, a way around, and that what are you doing? Like, what kind of benefit are we creating, by doing all we've learned is like shifty ways to get around stuff. So I always think back, like, they're forcing someone, like, you're going to sit here until this is gone.
Right.
it's one way or another going to backfire. So either they'll find a way to get around it, you know, feeding it to the dog under the table. It'll become some sort of battle if you have a strong-willed kid, or, you know, like in your best winning scenario, all you've done is like, if you have a kid that maybe is more agreeable or compliant by nature, all you've taught them is, hey, you know, just shovel it in so that you can get on to the next thing and do what you really want to do. You know, just try to ignore the fact that you want nothing to do with this. Well, you know, is that really like...
That's not healthy either.
No. And so I think when you start to think about it like that and you're like, oh, you know, I really have to think of this in a more long-term way. And when you realize, you know, it doesn't feel like it because it's not this like immediate gratification we all want, but when you do start to realize like, oh, this is actually like the best method to get them to eat as much as their body feels that they need. And like when there's no pressure, then you're more willing to try stuff, right?
Exactly.
When you just see people enjoying it.
Yes. Well, and you know, we had talked about basketball practices and our kids. And, you know, one thing that happens sometimes in our house is we get so busy, we get home and we sit down to eat right away. Well, my kids aren't usually hungry right after, you know, running or whatever sport. So it's almost like, okay, let's decompress a little bit, whether that's take a shower, do homework, and then we eat. Or, you know, if your child isn't quite ready, I guess, to partake in a family meal, they're sitting there, maybe they had a few bites, and then they think they're done, but then before bedtime they come to you and they say they're hungry. Well, maybe that's the time that you need to reheat up their food, and then that's their choice that they get to eat, rather than getting the goldfish out or whatever like that.
Right. Yeah, I had to learn. When my kids were younger, I would say we don't do that as much. Occasionally though, especially with my younger one, it'll still be like, well, we can reheat dinner, and then that's usually the test too. If they really are hungry, or if they were just hoping for something else,
that's
right?
Exactly
it's like, well, we can reheat your dinner because you didn't eat that, and it's like, I'm good.
I think I'm good. Yep, that's
like,
exactly
well, then I think you'll be hungry at breakfast.
Or then they'll realize that they should have eaten at mealtime.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it is exactly right. It's a little bit of a test that you have decided when it was mealtime and they chose not to, but now it's, you need to eat your food. So,
definitely. Well, and I think that speaks to the other thing too. And I do think it has helped me. It was something I knew on paper, but like just seeing my own kids grow through it, I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, we as adults, I mean, yes, you'll have like more active times of your life or more active days and less active days. And that might like change your hunger, you know, whatever, menstrual cycles, whatever. There might be different reasons why you might be more hungry one day and not. But kids, that's like way more, you know, they have so much more variation in how much they want to eat of what over much shorter periods of time. And I've definitely, you know, seeing it through your own kids, there's times, you know, where growth and development is just faster and slower. And you can see it, you know, within the same kid. I think that's the other thing is by the time you're to like the third kid, you've already been through this a couple of times and you're like, okay, I'm used to like, all right, well, this week you're eating everything in sight. And I'm starting to think like, oh man, do you eat too much? And then the next week it's like, well, I don't think he's eaten for, you know, he barely ate anything at breakfast and you know, and it's like you're on this emotional roller coaster. And eventually you realize, well, they're just listening to their body, because you do see too, you know, they'll kind of like eat a whole bunch, and then you might notice like, oh, you know, in these last 6 months, you've really grown a lot, you know, things of that nature. But it's so hard on that day to be like, oh, you must be. So I think it's the other thing is that realizing that when you are able to kind of stay in your lane in this division of responsibility, it actually allows for them to do what they need to do when they need to do it.
Right. And that creates those healthier lifelong eating habits that we want. Absolutely. It's really letting them listen to their bodies, but then also, again, making sure you have those healthy food choices available, making sure that, again, we are good role models, because that's a huge part of it too.
And then the other thing I did want to talk about that you had mentioned a little bit was sort of this idea of structure, because I think you touched on that a little bit, like maybe some of the problem that you're having with, you know, he never eats dinner, he never comes to meals and eats anything, is that perhaps we're in a situation where there's not structure, like in terms of, are we grazing all day? Have we not thought about the structure? Do we eat an after school snack at 4:30 and then think that you're going to be hungry for dinner at 5:15? So can you kind of speak to like maybe what you suggest in terms of when parents are like, they come to you and you're like, well, he doesn't eat well, but that's why I let him snack all day or something.
And that's probably, first of all, it depends on the age of the child, but almost having a conversation, a family conversation of saying, okay, I've noticed that you've been eating a lot when we get home from school, but could we change that a little bit so we have a better quality meal together? So maybe is that having an afternoon snack earlier in the day? Is there snack at school? And if so, could that snack be a higher fiber, higher protein type of food? So then that way they've already had their afternoon snack. They don't necessarily feel like they need one when they come home from school. And then you can have a regular dinner time. Same thing goes on the weekends. You know, sometimes we sleep in maybe too long and then everything kind of gets pushed back, or we start to then have that grazing all day. So going back to really telling your child, and we have to do this in the summertime a lot with my kids too, because it's like, we're home. Let's just eat all day. We're not eating all day. We're having a meal, breakfast, and then it's snack time, and then it's lunch, and then it's snack time, and then it's dinner. Similar to what you would have at school, a school day, having that structure. Again, and making sure that if, let's say, the child is going through those growth patterns and you notice that they're hungrier a lot, you know, is the fridge packed and ready to go with the cheese sticks, with the yogurt? Is it front and center? Same thing with the pantry. Do we have those higher fiber nutrition bars? Do we have the dried fruit? Do we have the nuts and seeds ready to go? So then they have those healthy food snacks, but then they have the snack, they're done with it, and then they eat again at mealtime. Because if we're eating refined foods that are not giving you that nutrition or that child that fiber and that protein to keep those bellies full, then of course they're going to be hungry. Of course they're going to want to eat and eat and eat.
Well, and how rigid do you suggest that people be about that? Because you know, my personal experience, it's definitely something that I suggest because I do think it's important, but I almost feel like the better you get at it, the less rigid you need. Does that make sense?
Oh, I love that.
I don't know what your thought about it is, but the more I like get to be able to kind of trust that that's the general pattern, then the less I worry about, you know, the one-offs where it's like, well, you know, you're hungry now, like, fine. But is that how our patterns are all the time, just random, or is it just like anyone? I think once in a while you'll just be like, you know, I ate breakfast and it maybe I as an adult don't usually have a morning snack, but like today it's like 10 o'clock and I'm starving. And so, you know,
listening to your body.
Exactly.
I mean that is so true too. Absolutely. We don't want it to be so structured and rigid that the child then feels like they can't have that extra piece of fruit because, you know, it's not snack time. That's not really what I'm hoping for with what I was saying, but it's also then making sure that when you are eating is having that high quality, nutritious, nutrient dense foods just to help with that hunger. Because I mean, no kid likes to be hungry. And as an adult, I hate being hungry. I mean, when you're hangry, no, you can't concentrate, can't focus. So same kind of thing as a child, you know, making sure, again, we have those nutritious food choices available, but then just kind of teaching them again that we can't graze. We can't just keep eating all day. Because I work with adults that, you know, they come to me and they have that struggle and they really do need some assistance with really putting some structure back into their day as well.
So then in those kind of situations, what do you suggest? Like, hey, at first, let's just be, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, so a lot of times in those situations, and this is adult or child, is really thinking about having multiple food groups at each time we eat. Okay, so we have these 5 food groups, not saying that we have to eat all 5 food groups at every meal. That's not our goal. But at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, can we get 3 to 4 food groups in? That's great because you're getting a variety of nutrients, a variety of vitamins and minerals and fiber. But then also at snack time, can we get 2 food groups? That's usually a goal. So I often get a question from clients that say, well, I had an apple for an afternoon snack and then I was extra hungry. And I'm like, that's true. That is exactly what happened in your body. Your body used up that the carbohydrates really quickly and then your metabolism kicked in, but there was no fiber or protein to back it up. Same thing with a kid. Let's pair it with something. So is the apple with peanut butter? Is the yogurt with a little bit of granola? Is it fruit with cottage cheese? Again, having having that balance. And I love when parents and adults and kids adopt this principle, because they come back to me and they say, I'm eating more, but I feel so much better. And some of my clients, adults, need to lose weight, and they're like, wow, I'm losing weight and I'm eating more. It's kind of a beautiful thing when that metabolism kicks in and they can start listening to their body more.
Well, I love that. So I guess finally on this topic, I think the thing I wanted to say, we talked a little bit at the beginning, is to say I'm having these concerns. So step one is like, let's make sure that I don't have a big problem, a significant problem. So certainly we talked about always, go see your doctor, go see a pediatrician. But there are other resources available. And so can you tell us a little bit about, what resources would be available maybe through HyVee or through your dietitian?
Absolutely. And I love that. And I love and I appreciate people that seek out a registered dietitian, because that is, went to school for it, had to pass a national exam, had to keep up with continuing education credits. So making sure that you go to a reliable source, such as a registered dietitian, if you need additional nutrition assistance. But during that assessment, I would be making sure that, number one, if it's a child, that they are growing properly, and with encouragement, of course, from the pediatrician if anything would need to be adjusted. But then just, again, looking at that whole picture of what that person is eating. Again, doesn't matter what age, really assessing what they're eating, and then making small changes. Again, as a dietitian, my goal is to make sure that these are reasonable, realistic expectations, and then making those small goals to get to big goals. And so dietitian services at HyVee can be anywhere from a freezer meal workshop that they can do virtually, kids cooking classes. I had mentioned getting kids involved. That's a perfect way to get kids to eat more, is to do our kids cooking classes. Also then just one-on-one counseling or meal planning. All those services can be done at HyVee, even virtually. And so just reach out to your local HyVee dietitian or contact me, and I can help connect everyone too.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Amanda.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You bet. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Feeding the Family. Be sure and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you here next week.